Iran sanctions escalate. Pakistan nursery fire. Canada tariff reprisal. And Dolly Parton dies. Greetings, humanity. Let's GROK the news. We cover the world's headlines, but first, a deep dive into the most important story in the world today. Dateline, Washington, D.C. American officials say they have opened a new phase in the 6-month confrontation with Iran by hitting the regime's remaining money channels, while claiming the Strait of Hormuz is finally clear of mines. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced designations against nearly 60 individuals, companies, and vessels linked to Tehran's covert oil sales, missile and nuclear procurement, cyber units, and shipping networks. He framed the package as an economic D-Day, saying the goal is to sever every remaining lifeline that sustains the government in Tehran until it stands alone. President Donald Trump then declared that every mine in the international waters of the Strait of Hormuz has been detonated or removed. He said that any boat that tries to lay new mines will be destroyed, and that United States Space Force sensors are watching every square inch of the waterway. The president added that there is now a zero-tolerance policy on mine placement. Hours after the sanctions were unveiled, a projectile struck an oil tanker near the strait and knocked out its engine room. Maritime reports said the crew was unharmed, and no one immediately claimed the attack. The incident occurred as Iran's Persian Gulf Strait Authority warned that ships ignoring Tehran's transit rules could face fines, seizure, or confiscation of cargo. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Center has for weeks cautioned mariners about drifting and uncharted mines. On Tuesday, in Tehran, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi sat down with Omani Foreign Minister Saeed Badr bin Hamad. The two men discussed a temporary joint shipping corridor and a plan to clear remaining mines so commercial traffic can move again through the narrow passage that once carried about 1/5 of the world's seaborne oil. Iran later stated that the strait itself remains closed, even while those talks continue. Well, so they say. Oil prices eased on the possibility that a corridor might eventually fully reopen, even though outbound transits have at times dropped to zero and have been as high as 2/3 of what was passing previously. Washington now says it will emphasize economic pressure and maritime enforcement rather than large-scale military strikes, still holding those in reserve. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has conveyed that message to allies. China, still Iran's biggest oil buyer, warned it could take all necessary measures if the campaign damages its interests. Treasury officials have given few public details on how Beijing will be treated ahead of a possible visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping next month. The geography is unforgiving. The strait lies between Iran and Oman's Musaddam Peninsula. Vessels that stay close to the Omani coast have used a route the United States protects. Iran still insists ships must follow its own northern lanes. In recent weeks, several tankers have been struck, boarded, or forced to turn around. One bulk carrier attack killed a chief engineer. A Liberian-flagged tanker was assessed, seized near Kashem Island. Bessent told Gulf partners, including Bahrain, that Iran must not be allowed to use Hormuz as a weapon against the world economy. The new listings also cover aviation companies accused of moving fighters, weapons, parts, gold, and cash. Iran's currency has come under fresh strain. Tehran calls the American allegations fabricated and says that any nation that joins the restrictions will be treated as an enemy. The White House says the mines are gone. Iran says it still controls access. Shipping companies, insurers, and navies are now weighing two competing claims. Well, this observer knows which claims cannot be trusted under any circumstances. I'm Robert Gardner, using GROK each weekday to truthfully summarize the news. I serve it up with my opinions, and I make that pretty clear. We review a roundup of the most critical reports in the world right after this. M.S. Gardner, my beautiful wife, is author of Wolf's Bane, a dark, serious, modern take on an old fairy tale, a page-turning Southern Gothic story for adults. Wolf's Bane, available now at thecuriousauthor.com or amazon.com. Now we grok the news with headlines from around the world. Dateline, Islamabad, Pakistan. A fire tore through the newborn nursery at the Pakistan Institute of Medical Sciences in Islamabad this morning after an air conditioner compressor exploded. Officials report at least 14 infants dead and 1 rescued. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has ordered an urgent probe into hospital safety lapses that allowed the blaze to spread so fast. Dateline, Ottawa, Canada. Canada said it will impose retaliatory tariffs on about $20 billion of American goods starting on September 8th. The move answers weekend United States duties following Canada's rejection of talks after a deal had already been pretty much agreed to. Prime Minister Mark Carney accused Washington of trying to subordinate Canada after President Trump told Ottawa leaders to fall in line or face worse penalties. This observer will remind the audience that, well, the trade talks were going really well. They were close to a signature when Carney rejected President Trump's demands that Canada stop snow washing, that is to say, passing through Chinese goods without the tariffs. Who is Carney taking orders from? London? Brussels? Beijing? He certainly is not representing the best interests of the Canadian people. This is going to hurt our friends up north. Dateline, Beijing. Indian National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi have met and agreed to advance talks on delimiting parts of the disputed Himalayan border. They set the 26th Special Representatives meeting for India in 2027 and stressed peace along the line of actual control. Dateline, New Delhi, India. Former Chief of Defense Staff General Anil Kautan has said that a loitering munition hunting radar system near Sargodha during Operation Sindoor may have struck Pakistan's Kirana Hills after running out of fuel. He called any impact unintentional. The hills are linked to nuclear-related facilities. Pakistan media had shown smoke rising from the hills. Dateline, Colombia. In the United States, Darlene Graham, sister of the late Senator Lindsey Graham and backed by President Trump, won the South Carolina Republican Senate primary runoff, defeating Representative Ralph Norman. In Oklahoma, another person backed by Trump, Mike Matzey, won the Republican gubernatorial runoff, while a Democratic socialist advanced in the Senate contest. Dateline, Kathmandu, Nepal. Flash floods and mudslides in Nepal's Rasuwa district near the Tibet border killed at least 8 people, with dozens of security personnel still missing. Prime Minister Balendra Shah directed rescue teams as villages, roads, and bridges were washed away overnight. Dateline, Washington, D.C. The United States State Department has paused immigrant visa interviews and appointments worldwide for a global training initiative. Officials say consular officers will be instructed to screen more tightly so that applicants are not likely to remain unlawfully. Interviews are to be rescheduled during the administration's broader immigration crackdown. Dateline, Gaza City. The Israel Defense Forces and Shin Bet said that they struck 5 Hamas weapons storage systems and a launch site in Gaza, including locations inside mosques. Palestinian health officials separately reported additional claimed civilian deaths from Israeli fire in the Burej camp and elsewhere this week. This observer would caution everyone to take these reports of civilian deaths with a grain of salt. What were these civilians doing right there near launch sites and weapons storage systems? You cannot convince this observer that they were purely civilians. They were human shields, and in many cases, knowingly. Dateline Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Armed gangs killed at least 47 people and kidnapped dozens more in an attack near Haiti's capital. Local authorities and international monitors are reporting, as we did yesterday. The assault is among the deadliest recent strikes as criminal groups continue to expand control around Port-au-Prince. Dateline Berlin. Germany deported 23 Afghan men to Kabul on a charter flight Tuesday. The government said most had no legal right to stay. The operation continues Berlin's effort to return rejected asylum seekers, even as security conditions inside Afghanistan remain volatile. Well, here's a news flash for you. Security conditions inside Afghanistan have been volatile for all of the life of this observer, and he ain't no spring chicken. It's about time that the Europeans, not to mention the United States, started rejecting and deporting all of these fraudulent asylum seekers, most nearly all of them young adult men who have come seeking Western welfare and Western women. Dateline, the Caribbean Sea. United States forces killed 4 people in a strike on a vessel that officials described as an alleged drug smuggling boat in the Caribbean. Oh, now come on, I guarantee you. Please pardon me for a second. Sometimes, and I've got to talk to GROK about this, sometimes the news media just gets out of hand. United States forces killed 4 people in a strike on a vessel that officials described as a drug smuggling boat in the Caribbean. They described it as a drug smuggling boat. I guarantee you they did not call it an alleged drug smuggling boat. Some reporter did that somewhere, and GROK just repeated it. I've got to have a long talk with this AI. The Pentagon said that the occupants were tied to narcotics trafficking. No further operational details were released today. Dateline Moscow, Russia. CIA Director John Ratcliffe traveled to Moscow for unannounced meetings with Russian officials, the first known visit by an American spy chief to the Russian capital since 2021. Reports linked the trip to regional security discussions. This observer hopes, perhaps vainly, that America and Russia will come to some sort of arrangement. You've got to cut the Europeans out. You have got to just cut them out of any negotiations and just send Zelensky and the rest of the corrupt, illegitimately oligarchy running Ukraine into the ground. Just send them demands and tell them they've got to meet them. Frankly, I think it's long past time, for the sake of Ukraine, for the sake of Russia, for the sake of the world, that this conflict end. Dateline Washington, D.C. President Trump has authorized imports of Mexican beef to ease a domestic supply pinch. At the same time, Texas tightened rules on Mexican-origin cattle because of the New World screwworm. Ranchers and state officials are watching both the federal opening and the parasite controls. This observer thinks it's naturally unfair to the cattlemen to bring in, dumping, so to speak, foreign beef to ease prices for consumers. This observer welcomes that. However, he lowered his own prices by buying an entire steer directly from a ranch instead of giving the money to the middleman monopoly. I'm talking to you, Tyson Foods. Hopefully, the government is preparing some way to ease the crisis, not only for the consumer, but also for the producers. The middlemen, why, as middlemen often are, although they perform a valuable service, they price gouge at every opportunity. Dateline Tucson. Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Rodney Scott said the agency is moving forward with a 62-mile Tucson 5 barrier project in southern Arizona. He called the remote desert stretch one of the most dangerous smuggling corridors and said that Congress funded the work. This observer wonders how, in 2026, the border wall project is still controversial to some, and then he considers Arizona, corrupt Arizona, and the hold that the drug cartels have on the officials there. Dateline Geneva, Switzerland. The United Nations and the International Committee of the Red Cross warned yesterday that the world is dangerously close to a point where autonomous robots could independently target human beings. They urged faster rules before lethal systems outpace diplomacy. Folks, Pandora's AI box is open, and all of the terrible things that can happen will happen eventually. However, like Pandora's box, there is also hope. AI and robotics can transform the world one way or the other, and in fact, probably both. Dateline Beijing, China. A Chinese court sentenced artist Gao Jun to 3 years in prison for satirical sculptures of Mao Zedong after a closed one-day trial. Authorities said he slandered a national hero. His wife reported the verdict from outside the courtroom. If you ever want to understand whether a nation is free or not, make fun of their leaders and heroes. Here in the United States, you wind up with a seat on some CNN panel. In China, you wind up in jail. Dateline Geneva, Switzerland. A United Nations Racial Discrimination Committee called on India to address hate speech and hate crimes against Bengali and Rohingya Muslims. New Delhi's delegation rejected the findings and said the review misrepresented security agency conduct inside the country. Well, most of the time, this observer rejects United Nations findings. He's ready for the United States to reject United Nations funding. Dateline Caracas, Venezuela. The death toll from the June earthquakes in Venezuela has climbed past 6,500 officially, according to updated figures released this week. Rescue and recovery work continues in the hardest-hit regions months after the original disaster. And Dateline Nashville, Tennessee. Country music legend Dolly Parton died at the age of 80. Her family has confirmed this. The Tennessee-born singer and actress was known worldwide for songs such as Jolene and I Will Always Love You, and you would probably recognize many more whether you are a country music fan or not. Tributes poured in from fans and fellow artists across the industry. This observer will certainly miss one of the world's great entertainers, a woman who is all heart. And I thank you for listening. Please join me tomorrow to once again GROK the News. I'm Robert Gardner. Godspeed and God bless.